Welcome back to Stablecoin House. I'm excited to be joined by Simon Baksys from LayerZero. Simon, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to kick off with a little 2-minute overview of LayerZero and what you guys work on to kind of set the table, and then we can dive into interop and kind of why this matters in the stablecoin and payments worlds?
Sure. Yeah, so LayerZero, for those that don't know, is the market-leading interoperability protocol. We're in the business of sending arbitrary data from point A to point B. We do that across about 135 different blockchains today. Certainly all your favorite EVMs, but also non-EVMs like Ton and Aptos and Solana, et cetera. And we roughly account for, as of last month, about 82% of all cross-chain industry volume in the industry. A good majority of that, just like in the rest of crypto, is driven by value transfer, right? So one of the biggest use cases is stablecoins, DeFi assets, LSTs, LRTs, RWAs, et cetera, being issued and moved across different blockchains.
Yep.
So we work with some of the biggest companies in the world, be that PayPal, Paxos, Tether, Athena, and a variety of others on moving all of their assets and kind of building out their interoperability strategies.
Very cool. I think there's a lot of misconceptions when I think about interop around like, hey, I can just wrap an asset or something like that versus like natively supporting that asset in the chain, which is what you guys do extremely well. Maybe that's a great place to kind of start to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of something wrapped versus getting it actually native, and how does that benefit everybody?
Yeah, so I think like we sort of call it like monolithic bridging, right? Like most people associate bridging with locking an asset on one chain and then minting a version of that asset on the destinations chain, which is fine, but that's historically where we've seen, you know, hundreds of millions and billions dollars worth of hacks in the past.
Bridges never get exploited. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it has a bad stigma attached to it, right?
It does.
Because you lock up all these assets, you create basically a honeypot that people want to go after. And then most of the exploits within that honeypot happen due to upgradability of smart contracts, right? It's never due to validation layers or decentralization. Yep. There's always, and someone is in goodwill upgrading a smart contract, but they leave something, some sort of vulnerability in there, which is then eventually drains all the funds, right?
Yep. So
historically, like what we call monolithic bridging is that. It's locking an asset and minting an asset, which by the way, you can absolutely do with LayerZero, right? It's a messaging protocol. Yep. So that message is just simply an instruction to lock and then an instruction to mint on the destination side.
Yep. Or burn and unlock, right, on the way back.
Exactly, vice versa, right? What we've done really well, and I think that's where we really stand out, and part of the reason why we account for so much volume and why we account for that 82% of all cross-chain messaging volume, is because we've been working directly with that asset issuers for the past 2 to 3 years to integrate LayerZero and the messaging into their smart contracts. Yep. So like today, like you and I can go and wrap any asset, I don't know, take Sol and mint it on, I don't know, Injective, pick your favorite chain. Like we can do that using any arbitrary messaging. What we can do is, for example, like PYUSD today is deployed on 2 different chains, Solana and Ethereum. We worked with PayPal to build that the messaging into the PYUSD smart contracts that is owned by the asset issuer, which in this case is Paxos.
Yep.
Fully approved by the regulator, which is the DFS, the Department of Financial Services in New York.
It's the important detail.
That's an important detail. And therefore allowing native minting and burning of the assets. So you're never locking up anything in the middle.
And you don't create a honeypot.
So like Sriram uses this analogy from EigenLayer when he talks about bridges, right? Like a physical bridge in the world is how an actual bridge in crypto should work, right? So like meaning that the load of the bridge is only the cars that are on that bridge at any given moment, right? So you're crossing over the Golden Gate Bridge, like the load of the bridge is just the car that's on and the people and whatever it may be, but as soon as they cross, that's it. Whereas if you think about bridging assets in a lock and mint capacity, then the load of the bridge is actually every single car that has ever passed the bridge.
Yep.
That's on the other side, right? Which therefore makes a very heavy bridge, and the load collapses and the bridge collapses, right?
And that makes sense as a starting place for bridging, right? When crypto was a more nascent industry, when we didn't have sophisticated regulated players, it's like, hey, why don't we just lock things? We'll issue them somewhere else, and that works for now. And now as I think utilization has increased, as we actually get to real use cases around value transfer, as regulated players have come in, you can't continue to create these billion-dollar honeypots everywhere that inevitably get exploited, right? You have more sophisticated attackers, you have Lazarus, you have these other folks. And when you paint attractive targets, inevitably you end up getting screwed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if you do it in an unsecure way, right?
Right.
Like one of the, I would say we have a huge target on our back, right? We have about $150 billion worth of value protected by the LayerZero protocol.
Yep.
But we have an incredibly strong stance for that exact reason on immutability of smart contracts. So everything that we deploy, every single messaging contract that we deploy is entirely immutable.
Yep.
It's battle tested over the years, et cetera, right? And can never be changed by anyone, obviously, including us. Which creates a much stronger security stance, which is often overlooked, I think, in the industry, right? People talk about immutability all the time, but they don't actually practice it. But there's a lot of different security mechanisms that matter, and ultimately, this is like similar to, if you want to think about it, how stablecoin issuers think about it. This is what Circle has done themselves with CCTP, right?
Yep.
They created their own messaging layer, their own attestation model to move USDC around. I would argue that model is actually still not great because it takes 20 minutes and you have to claim on destination and there's a variety of technical benefits that we can talk about. But that's the model that most big asset issuers want, is their own attestation, their own security, and their own ability to move assets natively. And that's exactly what LayerZero can be used for as an asset issuer.
Can we double click on USDC versus other issuers for a second? Because I think Circle is unique in the sense that they built CCTP in-house. Basically everybody else, and we're talking major asset issuers, we're talking Tether, we're talking about Paxos, we're talking about the giants of this world, have said, you know what, LayerZero will do this significantly better than we ever will in-house, we're going to do LayerZero instead. What do you think is kind of that dichotomy of why Circle went on their own versus everybody else recognizing the value of LayerZero?
A few things that I can say on camera and a few things that I can't. Generally, I mean, Circle has been sort of the poster child.
That means I asked a good question.
Circle has been the poster child of like the stablecoin industry. Right? They've been around for ages. They're obviously one of the most adopted, let's say, outside of Tether, stablecoins in the industry. And they were the ones that sort of were the first that really faced this issue and this problem, right?
Okay. Yep.
Because they deployed USDC, then they deployed it on multiple chains natively. CCTP didn't even exist.
Right.
And then back in, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and then you started seeing wrapped versions of USDC pop up on a variety of different chains that were done by the chains themselves or by third parties, et cetera. So you had like native USDC on ETH, and then native USDC on, Base, but then a wrapped version of USDC on Aptos, and then a wrapped version here. And none of that is composable, right? It's all fragmented liquidity because you always have to unlock and go back to the source. So they said, okay, we have all these wrapped versions, we have the native versions. We have to figure out how to unify liquidity, right? Yep. And this was frankly, even I think they started building CCTP. Maybe that's part of the reason before, LayerZero was really sort of a market leader and really was existing across a variety of and the breadth of chains that we do. But Circle also has the mentality. They have a lot of Google people that work there, which as a fellow ex-Googler, I can attest to. It's a very much so like build everything possible rather than buy approach. So maybe that has to do something with it from a cultural perspective as well.
And we're seeing that approach across more things, right? They're clearly vertically integrating, where instead of saying, hey, we're going to partner with Anchorage as an example, they announced they're getting an OCC Trust Bank charter themselves, right? Instead of saying, hey, we're going to partner with some sort of a payments network, they've come out with CPN instead, right? Like this is very much a verticalization around their particular tokens.
100%. And now that it's a $100 billion public company, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, well that makes sense, right? You want to own as much of the stack. However, like, and I think they should, but I think they're also as a business realize that they have core competencies and they have not core competencies and messaging. I think they would agree is not a core competency. And we have plenty of discussions on a weekly basis with Circle of like what the future of that will look like. But I think, they decided to build it in-house. They continue to build it in-house. And now there's so much investment there, frankly, right? That it's almost hard to backtrack on that. But we'll see. That may change in the future.
We had an interesting Circle talk at the house yesterday. We did not touch on interop, but we touched on a lot of interesting privacy concepts that it was interesting to hear their views on what they're doing there as well. I think one of the things that's always interesting to people as they're building the crypto space, I think you have two types of builders. You have the builders who are coming from technical backgrounds, who are technologists at heart, who are leaning a lot into DeFi and things like that. And then I think you have the people that are coming from regulated backgrounds of TradFi, banks, et cetera, who are entering the blockchain space. And often it's difficult for those people to understand each other. As you work with like the Paxoses and like the regulated giants of the industry, and you get things like the LayerZero pieces of the smart contracts approved by NYDFS, what have you guys seen as some of the challenges in deploying a technology product into heavily regulated environments?
I think that's one thing that we got right extremely early on, that I think most other interop protocols didn't, which was to provide complete flexibility and control of how you implement your messaging, right? So everything from block confirmations to non-sortering to, most importantly, and one of the biggest differentiators in the LayerZero architecture is owning your own attestation.
Okay.
What we said early on is that we don't think a big asset issuer, a regulated asset issuer, a regulated institution should ever or will ever trust some random validator set.
Fair.
And so what the way that we've built the LayerZero protocol and attestation, right, is basically just saying, signing the transaction, saying that the validity of the message is indeed valid.
Yep.
We said we think that the asset issuer should have control over that. They should be able to have their own attestation, or they should be able to configure whoever they want to trust, right?
Yep.
So like the attestation mechanism within LayerZero, we call that DVNs, or decentralized verifier networks. You can select whoever you want to trust of the third-party participants, and we have entities like Paxos and Google and Nethermind, et cetera, that all run these things.
Yep.
Or you can just take over the attestation and run it yourself. Whereas the typical interop model is you're going to trust some party of nodes, maybe a validator set, maybe a guardian network, maybe a Dawn network, like a variety of these other players, the way they do that. And early on, that seemed to the industry like maybe not a good idea, because a lot of the early adopters and degens actually didn't care about that, right? Like they didn't care about security at all, so they're just like, we'll just use the defaults, it doesn't matter, and click and go.
Yep.
But as more and more serious institutions come into play, that is now proven to be exactly the model, because they can configure it, they can own it, right? Like Fidelity must sign each single transaction that is sent cross-chain. Like that just has to happen.
Yep.
And so we got that right, and that architecture is really working out for us. And so that's why I think we work with most of these regulated institutions and financial institutions. But of course, I think to answer your question in terms of what's challenging, I think it's still that it's the trust aspect of it all, right?
Yep.
Like when you go to a regulated institution, you say, look, like these are like immutable smart contracts, and like you must trust them.
Yep.
Like what's the catch, right? Like, so you got to like convince them that it works and that it's built the right way, and things like ISO or SOC 2, et cetera, are like pretty rare in crypto, right? Like not most people don't have that type of compliance, and that's starting to become more and more necessary. So like all those things, but like I think the way we think about it is like we're building a multi-billion-dollar empire company that will be that will serve every single digital asset institution, et cetera. And so like we're preparing for all those things. We're doing the things that I think most crypto companies probably cut corners on. And really building for the long term.
It's interesting because there's a lot of parallels between what you just described, and I'll chill borderless for like 30 seconds. We'll go back to LayerZero. Between kind of what you described and what we've seen in the payments network market, where a lot of smaller startups and a lot of the early adopters of kind of stablecoin cross-border remittance were really drawn to companies that were providing like aggregation type services, where it's like, hey, you have a black box, I face you as a counterparty, I don't really know who you're reselling or aggregating on the back end, but I just need this value to transfer. And now our customer base are much kind of larger, more sophisticated payments players who are like, I can't just have an unknown counterparty risk profile. I want to be able to connect directly to the counterparties. I want to be able to say, okay, this is the set of counterparties that I trust, right? I trust PDAX, I trust Stripe, I trust Yellow Card, like whatever that looks like. I don't trust these other guys. And that's the set of counterparties that I actually want to transact with for my value transfer versus going to some sort of an aggregator that black boxes this all away and you don't even know where your money sits. And I think in general, we've taken similar approach where we got our SOC 2 super early, we're working on our ISO and things like that. And in my opinion, I'm curious to hear yours. I think those are some of what will become table stakes in order to actually get large institutional adoption of crypto rails in the coming future.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, especially if you want to accelerate it, right? Yeah. The alternative to that is just like continuous battle testing, which is like fine, I guess, but someone needs to bite the bullet and be the battle testers, and then eventually maybe you prove it out, right? But if you have all those checks and balances in place up front, then the sort of the battle testing is actually less important, right? Because you have like you've checked all the boxes, the compliance boxes, or whatever is required. So I think like if I often say like in the crypto bubble that we all play with, like it's all fine, right? But like that bubble is still fairly small. And so if you want to welcome the likes of, again, Fidelity, GPM, et cetera, like you gotta, and that's frankly the only place where like the mass adoption that we keep speaking about like comes, then you gotta be able to provide a sandbox with like all the right things for them to come play in it, right?
When we talk to a DeFi protocol, it's all about battle testing actually. And then when we go and talk to like an Airwall X, the first question is like, okay, send us your SOC or your ISO, right? Before you even get into the battle testing. And I think for people that are wanting to build with stablecoins and their market is more like traditional players and they want to service like PSPs and people like that, I think if you're a crypto native, it's easy to underestimate how much these sorts of things matter to those who are kind of TradFi native. And I think as an industry, we need to do a better job of adopting kind of TradFi diligence standards and speaking their language to them versus trying to convince them that our language is better.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? But yeah, I agree.
It does. Where do you think the growth for LayerZero comes in the next kind of 2 to 3 years? Like of the things that are public and that you can talk about, like where are you really excited for the LayerZero vision to go?
Yeah, I think it becomes more about, again, like going back to the fact that, we have, let's say 82% of all cross-chain messaging volume.
Is the next milestone 83?
Right, that's kind of where I'm going, right? Like that remaining 18% is theoretically, of course, important, but less important, right? Because if you get the remaining 18%, that doesn't make us a $100 billion company.
Yep.
Right? And so that means that it becomes a little bit more about expanding the total addressable market rather than sort of pursuing the existing one. So even though we have most of the asset issuers, we have most of the stablecoin issuers, DeFi assets, et cetera, that are already directly working with us, in many cases exclusively, I think it becomes about opening up the market in general, which means for us, and to your point, can't say too much, but for us, that means really building new products, right? That maybe go a little bit beyond of what we do today. It means the institutional market matters a lot. We're investing significantly in that and hiring quite a few different people and building things for that. And then again, I think it's addressing more use cases than just like burn and mint an asset from one chain to another. Like that's sort of at this point, I kind of view it as like we commoditized it. Then you start thinking about like chain abstraction, right? So like how does all of that happen in the background, which is going to be using our rails, but you're not the one that's actually clicking the button to take my USDC from Base to Arbitrum, right? Like Circle just released actually Circle Gateway, which is meant to be in like, Stripe is doing this with unified balances and unified accounts and all that. Like that's kind of where the world is heading, where every wallet, right? Doesn't matter what chain it is, doesn't matter what asset it is, right? Like it's all just abstracted away from the user. And I think that's sort of like the future that we're building towards. And I think that's where the growth becomes exponential rather than like, pursuing all the different people that actually understand crypto to try to like, take $100 from this chain to another.
Makes sense. Cool. We can take a couple questions. If anybody has anything for me or for Simon or about abstraction. Yeah, fire away.
I have a question about the immutable architecture contracts. Like I think it's very fundamental because there's such a approach to security. I'm wondering how, when you have to upgrade your business logic or add new features, do you like create a new and migrate, or how do you go about that? Just from a builder's perspective.
The question, let me repeat the question real quick for the mic. The question was, with the immutable contract architecture, what happens when you need to update business logic, basically?
Yeah, so the core immutability of the contracts are for the endpoints that we deploy on the different chains that we support. The message libraries that then are actually tapped to send the messages, etc., can be like there can be new versions of them, right? But you'll never sort of upgrade the existing version. So if you release a new version, then it's opt-in only, and then the world can choose to use the new version, if they want over time, and that sort of becomes like the new battle-tested standard.
Yep.
But the old version will never go away, and the immutable smart contract that is the endpoint on the chain will also never go away, never be changed. So if we do sort of release new things in the future, we will basically redeploy everything, and will be like a new thing to use until it's fully trusted.
Cool. Anybody else? We'll call it a day. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Where's the green room?